While Johann Strauss was creating beautiful music, Prussia and Italy were warring with Austria and the German Confederation falling apart. Our ancestors were leaving their German homeland to make their new lives in the United States. Christian and Margaretha Rell had their 3 surviving children with them on their long 6-month journey across the Atlantic. They found the climate of their first home in Stearns County, Minnesota, too harsh and headed south toward Kansas. They got only as far as Faribault, where they discovered a large German Catholic settlement and stayed the rest of their lives. Christian Rell was a stonecutter and owned a quarry near Faribault.
Grandpa was a tall, rangy man with a beard down to his chest. Gruff, very gruff as I remember. As a kid, you're scared to death of somebody like that. I remember Bert, Harold, and I used to stay upstairs because we were afraid of the old man. Jack.
Harold Paukert remembered Margaretha for her visits to the family farm, where she spent hours darning socks. She spoke very poor English, and it was difficult for us kids to communicate with her. Only 8 of the 13 children in the Rell family survived until adulthood. Margaret Heck and Theodore Paukert also left the old country in the late 1860s. They were married in Wisconsin, then farmed near Smith's Mill, Minnesota. He was a Catholic, she a Lutheran. The daughters were raised Lutheran, the 2 sons were Catholic.
Grandpa Paukert must have been unassuming and hard-working. He cleared a farm out of the forest with hand tools and the help of a team of oxen. The family was very self-sufficient. Grandpa even grew and cured his own tobacco. He carried wheat to the mill on his back to have it ground into flour, then carried the flour home. Harold.
Elizabeth, the youngest Rell child, was the darling of her older brothers and sisters, maybe even a bit spoiled. She attended normal training school and had been a teacher in Faribault, where her contract was not renewed because of a community uproar caused when she disciplined a student with a garden hose. That was a lucky break for her descendants, as she then obtained a position in Smith's Mill, where she met Theodore in a boarding house. It is said she was attracted to him because of his fine pair of matched bay horses. Theodore, the only surviving son of the Paukert family, had been a semi-pro baseball player and worked in the Smith Mill grain elevator. By the time he married at 33, Theodore had resigned himself to never getting married and having children and had given away his catcher's mitt. Theodore obtained a position managing a grain elevator in Deopolis, North Dakota, and Elizabeth joined him there following their marriage in 1909. In 1910, Elizabeth traveled back to Faribault to await the birth of their first child.
Dearest Elizabeth, I feel as you do, dearie, anxious and can hardly wait for the time when it's all over with, and you are Mama, and I am Daddy of a nice little baby. You just bet I am glad that I will have 3 to provide for, where I only had myself last year. I would not go back to the old way of living for anything, and you don't know how proud I will feel when the dearest girl in the world tells me I am Papa. You good girlie, I just feel like hugging you good and tight when I think about it. Theodore.
In 1914, they were awarded a homestead. By this time, they had 3 sons, Jack, Harold, and Bert. While Elizabeth lived on the homestead, Theodore lived and worked in the town of Plaza, running a grain elevator. After a year or so, Theodore quit his job at the elevator and came back to plow the prairie. By 1920, there were 7 Paukert children, Harold, Jack, Bert, Margaret, Sib, Marion, and June. Theodore was not a solitary kind of man. His heart was in the elevator business, so he decided to move back to Minnesota and purchase an elevator he heard was for sale. Elizabeth, the businesswoman, wanted him to firm up the deal before they moved, but he was an optimist. In 1920, this family of 9 piled onto a train and headed for Minnesota. Sib was the darling of the other passengers. She would climb up on people's laps and tell them that we were going to Minnesota to eat apples and strawberries, because that is one of the things that the folks missed from Minnesota. Harold. They arrived to discover the elevator had already been sold. From that time on, the family would remain tenant farmers, and times would be very difficult. They were forced to move 4 times.
We were on that farm west of West Concord. Things were going good and had a nice herd of cattle and everything else. And it seems to me But I was about, I don't know, maybe 14, 15 years old, something like that. And all of a sudden, my dad came home to town. He said the banks all went broke. What little money they had was gone. And the value of their livestock became almost zero. And I can remember my dad had a bunch of hogs ready for market. And it seems to me like he got $2.50 a 100 pounds for these 200-pound hogs. And
remember too was returning to school after Christmas, and everybody would, what did you get? What did you get? And the girl behind me, don't remember her name, but anyway, she wrote me a note, what did you get for Christmas? And she had listed things that she got, and it was kind of difficult for me to say I got a pair of stockings.
the tramps. That's a good word, because that's what we actually called them. You know, we were like a quarter of a mile from the railroad track, and I think that's where most of them came from. They traveled the rails. I think they had our house marked because they always got a handout of food. No money because there was none, but food, yeah.
Theodore loved animals, especially horses, and sometimes had more than he could afford to feed. He also loved to spend time in town arguing politics. He had his priorities, and farm work wasn't always at the top of the list. This was a big source of conflict with Elizabeth. Jack remembers his pa would never get out into the field until the morning paper came and he had read the news and sports.
Yeah, Pa was always very much interested in politics and current events of all kinds, and he had to have that morning paper. And the paper came by a rural mail carrier, get to our house, maybe about 9:30, something like that. And by the time he got the paper digested, it was 11 o'clock, and then we'd go out in the field and work until dark. And then we'd come in and have supper, and then after supper we'd go out and do our chores and never get through to 11 o'clock. We were on a different shift entirely than everybody else. We got our work done, but in the middle of the night, that newspaper had to come first.
To put the record straight, I've got different versions from my brother of a lot of things, and he doesn't even remember when Sibylla and I were out milking cows in the barn, and my sister Margaret and I would go down in the afternoons and drive the cows from the pasture up into the barnyard. And a lot of other little things that we never did have to get out and in the hay mow, you know, when they put in hay and things, but we sure had a lot of fun watching. At first we used to watch Mother kill the chicken, but then I think my brothers developed other techniques, and it was an axe. But my brothers would take and wring the poor chicken's neck and twirl it until it died. Favorite things, as I remember Dad doing, was taking us after our dinner. We would all go out and play softball in the front yard. I think it was because his sisters had told us that he really could have been a professional baseball player. He was so good when he was growing up, and he really instilled it in all of us. I think many of us, our athletic abilities came from Dad, but we really had fun after.
It was left to Harold, the eldest, to pick up a lot of the responsibility.
Talk a little bit about Harold. He was put in charge by both my mother and father when my dad was in town discussing politics and so forth. Harold was in charge out on the farm. And well, I tell you, he used to be a tough old taskmaster, and Bert and I used to fool around all the time, and he wanted to get things done right now, and something has stayed with him all his life, I guess.
Elizabeth was a manager and a worrier. Somebody had to be, but she did have hired help. Charlotte Emerson lived with the family for several years and remained a lifelong friend. There was also a Josephine who didn't last long.
Pa always needed to take mineral oil. When Josephine cleaned the cupboard, she got the bottles reversed. He went to take his mineral oil, and he poured the castor oil in the spoon. And mad, that man swore and cussed, Jack.
Elizabeth and Theed had many differences, but agreed on two things, religion and education. She insisted that her children finish high school. She was strict and had high expectations for her family. She was a proud woman, a real matriarch.
I remember in my high school days, my dad had given me a book on sex to read, and I had it up in the upstairs bedroom, and Mom found that thing, and boy, that's the last time anybody ever saw that book. She was really a prude.
And to lick our platter clean, and I just hated so much. Mashed potatoes and spinach were my two favorite things to dislike. And in penance for not eating my mashed potatoes, of course it was at dinner, it was at noontime, and all the rest of them got to go down into the pasture, I guess, and fly kites. It was windy weather, and I was not able to go down with them, and that was the worst discipline. I mean, the most traumatic, I guess, that I ever received.
She'd sit there at the table, and she wouldn't eat her potatoes, and here'd come Pa in from the barn or wherever he was, and somebody say, "Here comes Pa," and she said, "Please pass the potatoes." Oh, to hear Marion talk, you'd think there was no whippings in this household, but just for instance, Bert and I used to get 2 bits a week. We'd go to town on Saturday night, and we'd walk down the streets, up and down Main Street, and buy an ice cream cone. That'd be about it. And we went on strike for 50 cents a week. We weren't going to do any work around the place until Pa came along with we used to get the strap lots of times. But this time we got the reins of the harness across our back.
And even to this day, I just love politics. As Jack said, when we would go into town with him on...
Oh, God, he loved to argue with that.
Saturday mornings especially.
He would argue politics and religion. Oh, my God. She was Lutheran and a Republican.
The Paukert family was raised with a strong sense of moral values and were staunch Catholics. It was not always possible to go to church every Sunday, but if Mass was not possible, the Sunday Rosary was a must.
Once we had the car, Pa used to take us to catechism on Saturdays, and he always chewed that damn tobacco, and he spit out the side of that car, an open car, and the tobacco juice would blow on us kids in the back seat. Jack.
All of the Paukert children developed their unique personalities. Harold was the responsible eldest. Jack and Bert were much more free and open to horseplay. Muggs was the loving substitute mother who would attempt to talk us younger kids into doing the right thing and really let herself be open to being taken advantage of. Sib, on the other hand, was a shaker and a mover, and I early learned to snap to, as she meant business. Betty. I guess I was expected to protect my younger sisters. One Sunday afternoon, we boys were riding a black horse named Beauty. Sib wanted a ride, so being a good guy, I put her on the horse. Sib screamed, the horse jumped from me, and off went Sib and the horse, Sib still screaming. Through the barn door went Sib, nearly decapitated. Did I catch it? But how could it have been my fault? Bert. Marion was easy to get along with, easily talked into things. She was always being conned into polishing her older brother's shoes. She, Sib, and June were excellent basketball players. Sib, especially, was very competitive, and on one occasion was involved in a hair-pulling episode with an opponent. June could make things last much longer than anyone else, and got teased a lot. We always used to say, "How do you do, old Andy Gump?" And she'd get so mad. Marion. Ted was good-natured, jolly, and extroverted. He had lots of friends. He and Bill were like a team. Bill was more quiet. Betty was spoiled. The youngest girl was like a doll to her sisters when she was young, but she became their tormentor when she got older. She, Ted, and Bill enjoyed heckling their older sisters when their boyfriends brought them to the door. Tom, the baby of the family, was also spoiled by his older sisters. He was good-natured, naive, and easily influenced. He was only 13 when his father died. Many members of the family have served in our country's military. The first of these was Conrad Rell, who served during the Spanish-American War.
Dear sister, I wish you people could be here for just about 24 hours. You would enjoy yourself to see hundreds of men out drilling among the different monuments of this great battlefield. There are some living pictures here, especially the cotton field to the peach trees, which are hanging to the ground with ripe fruit. But give me the North. We get pretty fair grub now, but oh, wouldn't I like to get one of those meals Mother makes. It would make my mouth water. I have come to the conclusion of what war life is. The next time I enlist, I want to be a general.
A month later, Conrad was dead of typhoid fever. Twin George, who had come to care for him, died a month after Conrad.